Aurora's desperate screams echoed through the barn as her foal was dragged away, the merchant's cold smile burning into Emma's soul like a brand of betrayal. 3 years later, when Emma spotted the now-grown filly trembling in a crowded holding pen, her star-marked forehead crusted with blood, she knew she would risk everything, even her freedom, to bring Stella home to the mother who still called for her every night. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The vast plains of Montana stretched endlessly beneath the clear blue sky, a canvas of swaying grass and wildflowers that danced with the gentle summer breeze. Nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains was the Willow Creek Ranch, a place where horses ran free and time seemed to slow down. It was here that Aurora, a magnificent chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead, had made her home for the past 5 years. Aurora was special among the horses at Willow Creek. Her intelligent eyes, the color of rich amber, seemed to understand the world in a way that went beyond instinct. When she ran, her powerful muscles rippled beneath her gleaming coat, and her mane flowed like liquid copper in the sunlight. But what made her truly extraordinary was the deep bond she shared with Emma Williams, the 28-year-old daughter of the ranch owner. Emma had rescued Aurora from an auction when the mare was just 3 years old, terrified and mistreated. With patience and gentle hands, she had earned Aurora's trust, healing wounds both visible and hidden. Now they moved together as one, communicating through the slightest shift in weight or the softest whisper. For Emma, Aurora wasn't just a horse. She was a confidant, a partner, and a friend who had carried her through the darkest days after her mother's passing. This morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Emma stood at the fence watching Aurora with a smile that couldn't quite hide her concern. The mare's sides were swollen with the promise of new life, her first foal due any day now. "She's going to be fine," a gentle voice said from behind her. Emma turned to find her father, Richard Williams, standing there with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His weathered face, lined by years under the sun, creased into a smile as he handed her one of the mugs. "I know, Dad. I just can't help worrying." Emma accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. The vet said it could be any day now. Richard nodded, his eyes following Aurora as she grazed peacefully. "That mare is strong, just like her owner. Trust her instincts." As if aware they were talking about her, Aurora lifted her head and nickered softly, her ears pricked forward. Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the morning air. "See? She's telling us to stop fussing." The Williams family had built Willow Creek Ranch from nothing, turning it into one of the most respected breeding operations in the state. Their horses were known for their intelligence, temperament, and the special care that went into raising each one. It wasn't about quantity for the Williams. It was about quality and the well-being of every animal that called their ranch home. 3 days later, in the stillness of a star-filled night, Aurora gave birth to a beautiful filly with legs that seemed too long for her body and a perfect white star on her forehead, mirroring her mother's marking. Emma, who had been sleeping in the barn to keep watch, assisted with the birth, tears of joy streaming down her face as the newborn foal took her first wobbly steps. "Hello, little Stella," Emma whispered, naming the filly after the blanket of stars above them. Aurora gently nuzzled her foal, eyes soft with maternal pride. In that peaceful moment, Emma couldn't imagine anything disturbing the perfect harmony of their lives. But peace, like the Montana weather, can change without warning. The trouble began a month later when Richard Williams suffered a severe heart attack. Emma found him collapsed in the barn one morning, his face ashen and his breathing labored. The medical bills piled up quickly, and the ranch, which had always operated on tight margins, began to struggle. Emma took on extra work, breaking and training horses for neighboring ranches, but it wasn't enough. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and Richard, still weak from his ordeal, grew more despondent each day. "We might have to sell some of the horses," he finally admitted one evening, the words clearly causing him physical pain. "Just until we get back on our feet." Emma's heart clenched at the thought, but she nodded, understanding the harsh reality they faced. "We'll be selective, only to good homes." What neither of them knew was that James Harrington, a horse merchant with a reputation for cutting corners and caring more about profit than the welfare of his animals, had heard about their financial troubles. Harrington operated several auction houses across 3 states and was always looking for quality horses he could acquire cheaply and sell at a premium. He arrived at Willow Creek on a crisp autumn day, driving an expensive truck that seemed out of place against the modest backdrop of the working ranch. Emma watched him approach from the porch, instantly wary of his too bright smile and the calculating look in his eyes. "Miss Williams," he greeted, extending a manicured hand. "James Harrington. I heard you might have some horses for sale." Emma shook his hand reluctantly, noticing how he was already looking past her, assessing the property and the animals visible in the nearby pasture. "We're considering selling a few, yes, but we're being very particular about where they go." Harrington's smile didn't waver. "Of course. I only deal in quality placements myself. Mind if I take a look at what you've got?" Against her better judgment, Emma showed him around. When they reached the pasture where Aurora and Stella were grazing, Harrington stopped abruptly. His eyes narrowed as he watched the elegant mare and her spirited foal, who was now racing in joyful circles around her mother. "That filly has exceptional conformation," he said, his voice casual but his gaze intense. "And the mare, thoroughbred cross?" "Yes," Emma replied, uncomfortable with the way he was staring at them. "But they're not for sale. Aurora is my personal horse, and we're keeping Stella." Harrington nodded, but something in his expression made Emma's stomach tighten. Shame. They'd fetch a good price. The filly especially. With those bloodlines and that movement, she could be worth a small fortune to the right buyer. "Like I said, they're not for sale." Emma's voice was firmer this time, and she deliberately turned away, leading him toward the other pastures where the horses they were actually considering selling grazed. By the end of his visit, Harrington had made modest offers on 2 geldings and an older mare. The prices were lower than Emma had hoped, but they were fair enough, and the immediate cash would help with the most pressing bills. She accepted, telling herself that at least these 3 horses would be going to new owners through proper channels. As Harrington was leaving, he paused by his truck. "If you change your mind about that filly, my offer stands. I'd give you top dollar, enough to clear a good chunk of your debt, I'd imagine." Emma shook her head. "We won't change our minds, but thank you for your business today." Harrington smiled, tipping his hat. "Never say never, Miss Williams. These are difficult times for small ranches." With that ominous remark hanging in the air, he drove away, leaving Emma with a sense of unease she couldn't quite shake. That night, as she checked on Aurora and Stella one last time before bed, Emma whispered a promise to them both. "You're staying right here with me, no matter what. But promises, no matter how heartfelt, can sometimes prove impossible to keep." The weeks following Harrington's visit brought a harsh Montana winter, the kind that tested both body and spirit. Snow blanketed the land, transforming Willow Creek Ranch into a frozen landscape of white-capped fences and ice-laden trees. For Emma, each day became a battle against the elements and mounting financial pressures. The money from the sale of the 3 horses had disappeared quickly, swallowed by medical bills and the essential costs of keeping the ranch running. Richard's health improved marginally, but he remained a shadow of his former self, unable to handle the physical demands of ranch work. Emma would often find him sitting by the window, staring out at the snow-covered pastures with a faraway look in his eyes that broke her heart. "Dad, you should be resting," she said one evening, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Richard covered her hand with his own, his fingers thin and pale. "I can't rest when I know you're carrying everything on your shoulders, Emma. This isn't fair to you." "We're going to be okay," she reassured him, though uncertainty gnawed at her insides. The truth was, they were falling behind on the mortgage, and the bank had started sending increasingly stern notices. In the barn, Aurora and Stella had become inseparable. The filly was growing rapidly, her spindly legs becoming stronger each day. She had inherited her mother's intelligence and curious nature, often investigating anything new in her environment with a boldness that made Emma laugh. The white star on her forehead seemed to glow against her dark coat, a perfect echo of Aurora's marking. On a particularly bitter January morning, Emma was surprised to see James Harrington's truck pulling up the snow-covered driveway. She stepped out onto the porch, pulling her jacket tighter around her body against the biting wind. "Mr. Harrington," she greeted him cautiously. "I wasn't expecting you." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached. "Just checking in on how those horses are settling with their new owners. Also thought I'd see if your situation has evolved since we last spoke." The way he emphasized evolved sent a chill through Emma that had nothing to do with the winter air. "The 3 horses you purchased are no longer your concern, Mr. Harrington. They belong to their new owners now. And our situation remains the same. We're not selling any more at this time." "I heard the bank's been breathing down your neck," Harrington said bluntly. "Small towns. Word travels fast." Emma stiffened. "Our arrangements with the bank are private." Harrington shrugged, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Just saying, my offer for that filly still stands. In fact, I'd be willing to increase it, enough to give you some real breathing room." "Stella isn't for sale," Emma replied firmly. "Neither is Aurora. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." As she turned to go back inside, Harrington called after her. "Pride won't save this ranch, Miss Williams. Sometimes we have to make hard choices to protect what matters most." Emma paused, her hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, she said, "What matters most to me is already protected, Mr. Harrington. Good day." Later that evening, as Emma finished the barn chores, she leaned against Aurora's stall, watching as the mare gently nuzzled her growing foal. "Don't worry, girls," she whispered. "I won't let him anywhere near you." But James Harrington was not a man accustomed to hearing no. 2 days later, Emma received a call from the bank. The loan officer's voice was apologetic but firm. They were accelerating the foreclosure process due to missed payments. Unless the Williams could come up with a significant payment within 30 days, they would lose everything. That night, Emma sat at the kitchen table, bills and notices spread before her, calculating and recalculating figures that refused to add up to anything but disaster. Richard found her there in the early hours of the morning, her eyes red from crying. "We need to talk about options, Emma," he said gently, sitting across from her. "All the options. If you're going to suggest selling Aurora and Stella—" "Just Stella," Richard interrupted, his voice pained. "Just the filly. You could keep Aurora." Emma stared at her father in disbelief. "How can you even suggest that? You know what Aurora went through before I rescued her, and now you want me to sell her baby?" "I want us to keep our home," Richard countered, his voice rising slightly before he controlled it. "I want you to have a future, not lose everything your mother and I built because of my failing health." Emma pushed back from the table, standing up. There has to be another way. But as the days passed, no other solution presented itself. Emma approached other ranchers, seeking loans or work, anything to generate the funds they needed. She even considered selling her mother's jewelry, the few precious pieces she had inherited, but knew they wouldn't come close to the amount required. A week before the bank's deadline, disaster struck. Emma woke to find Richard unconscious on the bathroom floor. Another heart attack, more severe than the first. The hospital bills mounted, and Emma found herself facing an impossible choice. When James Harrington's truck appeared at the ranch again, Emma was standing in the barnyard, watching Stella race around the paddock, her movements fluid and powerful despite her youth. Aurora stood nearby, alert and protective as always. "I heard about your father," Harrington said, approaching with an expression of practiced concern. "How is he?" "Stable," Emma replied tersely. "What do you want, Mr. Harrington?" "I think you know." He gestured toward Stella. "My offer still stands. In fact, given your current circumstances, I'm willing to increase it substantially, enough to pay the bank what you owe and cover your father's medical bills." Emma closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the decision crushing down on her. "I need assurances," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "Written guarantees that she'll be well treated, that you'll find her a good home." Harrington nodded solemnly, but there was a gleam of triumph in his eyes that made Emma's stomach turn. "Of course, I have buyers who are looking for exactly her quality and bloodlines. She'll go to a show home, be well cared for. You have my word." His word. Emma knew it was worth little, but what choice did she have? The alternative was losing everything, the ranch, their home, and still possibly both horses when the bank took over. "I'll need time," she said, "to prepare Aurora. They've never been separated." "You have until tomorrow morning," Harrington replied, all pretense of sympathy gone from his voice. "I'll bring the paperwork and the money. Be ready." That night was the longest of Emma's life. She spent it in the barn with Aurora and Stella, her tears soaking into Aurora's mane as she whispered apologies over and over. The mare seemed to sense something was wrong, standing unusually still, her eyes watchful. "I'm so sorry," Emma murmured. "I don't know what else to do." Morning came too quickly, the pale light of dawn bringing with it the sound of Harrington's truck and horse trailer. Emma had already separated Stella into a different stall, unable to bear the thought of Harrington witnessing the moment of parting. Aurora began to pace anxiously, nickering for her foal. Stella answered from the other stall, her calls becoming more frantic as she sensed her mother's distress. Harrington entered the barn with two men, heading straight for Stella's stall. Emma stood frozen, the signed papers clutched in her hand, the check for an amount that would save the ranch feeling like a brand against her skin. As they led Stella out, the filly resisted, her eyes wild with fear. Aurora's cries became desperate, and she began to kick at her stall door with such force that the wood splintered. "You'd better control that mare," Harrington warned, "or the deal's off." Emma moved to Aurora, placing herself between the frantic mare and the door, speaking softly through her tears. "I'm sorry, girl. I'm so sorry." Outside, Stella's frightened whinnies grew fainter as she was loaded into the trailer. Aurora's answering calls were heart-wrenching, primal sounds of loss and desperation that seemed to pierce the very air. As Harrington's truck pulled away, taking Stella with it, Emma sank to the barn floor, her body shaking with sobs. Aurora continued to call for her foal long after the sound of the truck had faded, her cries eventually subsiding into a silence more devastating than any sound. The mare that had once been so full of life stood motionless in her stall, staring at the barn door as if expecting her baby to return at any moment. In that instant, Emma knew she had made a terrible mistake, one that no amount of money could ever make right. The days following Stella's departure blurred together in a haze of guilt and regret. Emma paid the bank and settled her father's medical bills, but the victory felt hollow. The ranch was saved, yet something vital had been lost, something money couldn't replace. Aurora refused to eat. She stood at the fence line for hours, staring down the road where the trailer had disappeared with her foal. Her once gleaming coat became dull, and her eyes, once so bright and intelligent, grew distant. When Emma approached, Aurora would acknowledge her with a slight turn of her head, but the connection they had shared seemed frayed, damaged by the betrayal Aurora couldn't understand. "Please eat something," Emma begged on the third day, holding out an apple, Aurora's favorite treat. The mare sniffed it half-heartedly but turned away. Emma's hand dropped to her side, the rejected apple a small but painful symbol of all she had broken. Richard, now home from the hospital and moving slowly around the house, watched his daughter's suffering with growing concern. He found her one evening sitting on the porch steps, her eyes fixed on Aurora's solitary figure in the distance. "You can't keep punishing yourself," he said gently, lowering himself to sit beside her. Emma didn't look at him. "I made a promise to them both and I broke it. How am I supposed to live with that?" Richard was silent for a moment. "By doing everything you can to make it right." Emma turned to him then, a spark of something, determination perhaps, lighting her eyes for the first time in days. "What do you mean?" "Find out where he took her. Make sure she's all right. And if she's not..." He left the sentence unfinished, but Emma understood. The next morning, Emma began making calls. She contacted everyone she knew in the horse community, asking if they'd heard anything about Harrington's recent acquisitions or sales. Most conversations led nowhere, but a few provided small pieces of information that, pieced together, painted a disturbing picture. "Harrington? Yeah, I know him," said Marcus Jenkins, an old friend of her father's who ran a training facility 3 counties over. "Wouldn't trust him with a dead horse, let alone a live one. Word is he's been shipping a lot of stock to his place in Wyoming lately. Got some kind of holding operation there before he moves them on. Wyoming. It wasn't much, but it was a start." Emma thanked Marcus and hung up, already planning her next move. That evening she sat down at her computer and began researching everything she could find about James Harrington's operations in Wyoming. Meanwhile, Stella was experiencing a harsh introduction to her new reality. After being loaded into the trailer at Willow Creek, she had endured a long, frightening journey. The trailer was packed with other horses, nervous yearlings and thin broodmares standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark, swaying space. By the time they arrived at Harrington's facility, Stella was exhausted and terrified, her legs trembling beneath her. The holding pens at Harrington's Wyoming compound were nothing like the spacious pastures of Willow Creek. Muddy paddocks were crowded with horses of all ages, many looking underfed and poorly cared for. Stella was unloaded roughly and herded into a pen with several other young horses, all looking as confused and frightened as she felt. "This one's special," Harrington told his foreman, pointing at Stella. "Clean her up and get some weight on her. I've got a buyer in Kentucky who'll pay top dollar, but she needs to look the part." The foreman, a hard-faced man named Tucker, eyed Stella critically. "Looks soft, too pampered." "Then toughen her up," Harrington replied dismissively. "Just don't mark her up. That coat and conformation are worth a fortune to the right buyer." For Stella, the next few weeks were a blur of strange hands, unfamiliar voices, and an aching loneliness that never subsided. She would call out for her mother, the plaintive sounds echoing across the compound, but no answering nicker ever came. At night, she would dream of green pastures and the warm security of Aurora's presence, only to wake to the cold reality of her bare stall and the indifferent faces of her handlers. Back at Willow Creek, Emma was finally making progress. Through a network of contacts, she discovered that Harrington was indeed keeping horses at a large facility near Casper, Wyoming. She also learned something that made her blood run cold. The facility was notorious among local horse rescues, as a place where animals were often kept in poor conditions before being shipped to auctions, or worse, to slaughterhouses across the border. "You need to be careful," warned Lisa Delaney, a rescue worker who had dealt with Harrington before. "He's got connections, and he doesn't like people poking around his business." "I don't care," Emma replied, her voice steady with resolve. "He has my horse, and he promised she would go to a good home." Lisa sighed. "Promises from men like Harrington aren't worth the air they're made of. If you're serious about finding this filly, I might be able to help. We've got volunteers who keep an eye on shipments going in and out of his place." Hope flared in Emma's chest for the first time since Stella had been taken. "I would appreciate any help you can give." While Emma worked tirelessly to locate Stella, Aurora's condition continued to deteriorate. The mare had lost weight, and a dull resignation had replaced her initial frantic searching. She would follow Emma around the paddock, not with her usual eager energy, but with a quiet desperation, as if hoping each time that Emma might lead her to Stella. Dr. Morgan, the local veterinarian, examined Aurora and shook his head gravely. "There's nothing physically wrong with her that I can find, Emma, but horses can die of a broken heart, same as people. She's giving up." Emma placed her hand on Aurora's neck, feeling the slow, steady pulse beneath the skin. "What can I do?" "Find her, Foal," Dr. Morgan said simply, "or help her accept that she's gone." Neither option seemed possible. Emma had no guarantee she could locate Stella, and Aurora showed no signs of moving past her grief. But as she stood there, with her hand on Aurora's warm neck, Emma made another promise. This one she intended to keep. "I'm going to find her, Aurora," she whispered. "I'm going to bring her home." That night, Emma packed a small bag with essentials. She left a note for her father explaining her plan and asking him to look after Aurora. Before dawn, she loaded her old pickup truck with supplies for the long drive to Wyoming. As she was about to leave, Emma walked to Aurora's stall one last time. The mare was standing quietly in the corner, her head low. "I'm going to find Stella," Emma told her, stroking her neck. "I don't know how long I'll be gone, but I promise I'm going to try." Aurora lifted her head slightly, her ears flickering forward at the sound of her foal's name. For a brief moment, the old connection between them seemed to strengthen, as if Aurora understood exactly what Emma was saying and why she was leaving. Emma pressed her forehead against Aurora's, closing her eyes. "Wait for us," she whispered. As the first light of dawn broke across the eastern sky, Emma's truck pulled away from Willow Creek Ranch, heading west toward Wyoming and whatever awaited her there. She had no plan beyond finding Harrington's compound, no idea what she would do when she arrived. All she knew was that she couldn't live with herself if she didn't try to make things right. Behind her, standing at the fence line as she had every day since Stella's departure, Aurora watched the truck disappear down the long driveway. For the first time in weeks, the mare lifted her head high, her ears pricked forward, as if sensing that something had changed, that perhaps, against all odds, there was reason to hope again. The drive to Wyoming stretched longer than the miles on the map suggested. Emma drove through small towns and vast stretches of empty land, her mind constantly returning to Aurora's forlorn figure at the fence and Stella somewhere out there, alone and frightened. She stopped only when necessary, pushing through exhaustion with the determination of someone on a rescue mission. By late afternoon on the second day, Emma reached Casper. Following Lisa Delaney's directions, she found a small motel on the outskirts of town and checked in, paying cash to avoid leaving a trail. The room was basic, a bed, a dresser, and a bathroom with flickering lights, but it would serve as her base of operations. Emma showered quickly and changed into fresh clothes, then called the number Lisa had given her for a local contact. "This is Jake," a gruff voice answered after 3 rings. "My name is Emma Williams. Lisa Delaney gave me your number. I'm looking for information about James Harrington's horse operation. There was a pause, then, meet me at Dusty's Diner in an hour. Corner booth in the back. I'll be wearing a red cap. The line went dead before Emma could respond. She tucked her phone into her pocket, checked her appearance in the mirror, and headed out. She had 40 minutes to find the diner and gather her thoughts. Dusty's was a typical roadside establishment. Vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and grease, country music playing softly in the background. Emma spotted Jake immediately, a weathered man in his 60s with sun-creased skin and a faded red baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. She slid into the booth across from him. "You're the Montana girl," he said. It wasn't a question. Emma nodded. "I'm looking for a filly that Harrington took from my ranch about 3 weeks ago. Dark bay with a white star, just under a year old." Jake stirred his coffee slowly. "Harrington moves a lot of horses through his place. What makes you think yours is still there?" "I don't know that she is," Emma admitted, "but I have to start somewhere." Jake studied her for a moment, then leaned forward. "I worked for Harrington for 6 years before I couldn't stomach it anymore. His operation is big, multiple barns, holding pens, and office complex. Security's tight. He doesn't like visitors." "I'm not looking to visit," Emma said. "I need to know if my filly is there, and if she is, I need to get her out." A tired smile crossed Jake's face. "Just like that, huh? Listen, girl, Harrington doesn't let go of valuable stock unless he's getting paid, and from what I hear, he's got plans for any decent young horses that come through." "What kind of plans?" Jake sipped his coffee before answering. "He's been shipping the better ones east. Got connections with some training barns in Kentucky, New York. The rest?" He trailed off, his expression darkening. Emma felt her stomach tighten. "The rest what?" "The ones that don't make the cut. Too small, wrong color, bad temperament. They go south. Mexico, usually." The implication hung in the air between them. Emma had heard the stories about horses shipped across the border to slaughterhouses. The thought of Stella meeting such a fate made her physically ill. "I need to get onto his property," she said, her voice firm despite the fear churning inside her. "I need to see for myself." Jake shook his head. "That's suicide. Place is guarded, cameras everywhere. You'd never make it past the front gate." "Then how am I supposed to find out if she's there?" Jake considered her for a long moment. "There might be a way. Harrington's always looking for cheap labor. Not many people stick around long. The work's hard, and he's a bastard to work for. But they're hiring right now for barn hands." Hope flickered in Emma's chest. "You think I could get hired?" "Maybe. You'd need a cover story, different name, and you'd have to be careful. Ask too many questions, show too much interest in any particular horse, and they'll get suspicious." Emma nodded, her mind already racing. "I can do that. I've worked with horses all my life. I know how to keep my head down." Jake pulled a napkin toward him and scribbled an address. "Go here tomorrow, 7 a.m. sharp. Ask for Tucker. He does the hiring. Don't mention my name." Emma took the napkin, folding it carefully. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jake warned. "You're walking into the lion's den." At precisely 7 a.m. the next morning, Emma stood at the gates of Harrington's compound. She had dressed the part: worn jeans, sturdy boots, a faded flannel shirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had also crafted a new identity: Sarah Jensen, a drifter looking for work, with experience on several ranches but no permanent ties. The compound was larger than she had imagined, a sprawling collection of barns and paddocks surrounded by a high chain-link fence. The main gate was guarded by a bored-looking man in a small booth who barely glanced at her before pointing her toward a prefabricated office building. Inside, she found Tucker, a tall, thin man with cold eyes and a perpetual frown. He looked her up and down skeptically as she explained she was there about the job. Ever worked with problem horses? He asked after she had given her rehearsed background. Emma nodded. Yes, sir. Had a job breaking Mustangs in Nevada for a while. This seemed to interest him. We get some wild ones through here. Need people who aren't afraid to be firm. The way he said firm made Emma's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. I can handle myself. After a few more questions, Tucker seemed satisfied. Pays weekly, Cash. You start today. Bunkhouse is for full-timers. You'll need to find your own place to stay. Josh will show you around. Josh turned out to be a young man not much older than Emma, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in such a harsh environment. As they walked through the compound, he pointed out the different areas, the sorting pens, the main barns, the isolation paddocks for new arrivals. Where do you keep the young stock? Emma asked casually. I worked with yearlings at my last job. Josh pointed to a barn at the far end of the property. Barn C is mostly young ones right now. That's where they get prepped for shipping. Emma's pulse quickened. Shipping where? Josh shrugged. Depends. Some go to training facilities, some to auctions. Harrington's got connections everywhere. As they approached Barn C, Emma tried to contain her growing anxiety. Would Stella be inside? How would she react if she saw Emma? Would she give away their connection? The barn was dimly lit and smelled of hay and horse sweat. Rows of stalls lined both sides of a central aisle, most containing young horses who watched their approach with wary eyes. Emma scanned each face as they walked, looking for the distinctive white star that would identify Stella. These are all headed out next week, Josh explained. Big shipment going east to some fancy training barn. Emma nodded, barely hearing him as she continued her desperate search. Then, near the end of the row, she saw her, Stella, standing with her head low in a corner stall. The filly was thinner than when Emma had last seen her, her coat dull, but there was no mistaking that perfect star or the delicate shape of her head. Emma's heart leapt into her throat. She forced herself to keep walking, to not react, even as every fiber of her being wanted to run to the filly and throw her arms around her neck. Something wrong? Josh asked, noticing her change in demeanor. Emma quickly composed herself. No, just reminds me of a horse I used to work with, that bay there. Josh glanced at Stella. Oh, that one. Yeah, she's been a handful. Came in a few weeks ago, still hasn't settled. Tucker says she's got good bloodlines, though. Should fetch a decent price if she shapes up. What happens if she doesn't shape up? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Josh's expression darkened slightly. Let's just say you don't want to end up on the wrong truck around here. As they continued their tour, Emma's mind raced. She had found Stella, but getting her out would be another matter entirely. The compound was heavily secured, and even if she could somehow get to Stella, how would she transport her? Where would they go? One thing was certain. She had to act quickly. Josh had said the shipment was leaving next week. That gave her only a few days to come up with a plan to save Stella before she disappeared again, perhaps forever. The next few days blurred together as Emma settled into her role at Harrington's compound. She arrived early each morning, worked until her muscles ached, and left late, always with her eyes and ears open. Tucker assigned her to various barns, but she volunteered for extra shifts in Barn C whenever possible, desperate to spend time near Stella without arousing suspicion. On her third day, Emma was finally assigned to feed the horses in Barn C. Her heart pounded as she moved down the aisle with the feed cart, measuring out grain for each stall. When she reached Stella's stall, she paused, making sure no one was watching before she approached the filly. "Hey, girl," she whispered, keeping her voice low and steady. "Remember me?" Stella, who had been standing listlessly in the corner, lifted her head. For a moment, she stared at Emma with dull eyes that showed no recognition. Then slowly, her ears pricked forward. She took a cautious step toward Emma, her nostrils flaring as she caught a familiar scent. "That's it," Emma murmured, fighting back tears. "It's me. I'm here." Stella stretched her neck, her soft muzzle touching Emma's outstretched hand. The contact was brief but electric, a spark of connection that sent hope surging through Emma's veins. She wanted desperately to linger to comfort the filly and promise her that everything would be all right, but she knew better. Tucker or one of his men could appear at any moment. With reluctance, Emma moved on to the next stall, but she slipped a small apple from her pocket into Stella's grain bucket as she left. A secret offering, a promise of better days to come. As the week progressed, Emma gathered crucial information about the compound's operations. She learned that the security guards changed shifts at midnight, that the cameras covering the back entrance to Barn C had a blind spot near the equipment shed, and that the shipment east was scheduled for Monday morning, just 4 days away. She also discovered, through careful observation and snippets of overheard conversations, that Harrington himself rarely visited the compound, leaving day-to-day operations to Tucker and a handful of trusted employees. This Sunday, however, he was expected to arrive for a final inspection of the horses being shipped out. Each night, Emma returned to her motel room and mapped out potential escape routes. She studied satellite images of the compound on her laptop, marking entry and exit points, noting the locations of security cameras and guard posts. The plan taking shape in her mind was risky, possibly even foolish, but she couldn't see any other way. On Friday afternoon, Emma was cleaning stalls in Barn C when she overheard Tucker speaking to Josh in the aisle. "That bay filly in 14 still isn't cooperating," Tucker said, his voice tight with irritation. "Harrington wants her ready for the Kentucky buyer, but she's fighting the saddle, won't lead properly. If she doesn't shape up by Sunday, she's going on the Mexico truck instead." Emma's blood ran cold. Stall 14 was Stella's. "She seems scared, not mean," Josh replied, his voice softer than Tucker's. "Maybe she just needs more time." Tucker snorted. "Time costs money. Harrington doesn't keep projects around unless they're worth the investment. That filly's got one more chance tomorrow, then I'm making my recommendation." Emma continued shoveling soiled bedding, her movements mechanical while her mind raced. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. If Stella was relegated to the Mexico truck, Emma might not be able to reach her in time. That evening, after her shift ended, Emma drove to a feed store in town and purchased a halter and lead rope, hiding them under the seat of her truck. She then stopped at a gas station and bought a prepaid phone. Sitting in her truck in the parking lot, she made a call to the one person she trusted to help. "Dad," she said when Richard answered. "I found her. I found Stella." There was a moment of silence then. "Thank God. Is she all right?" "She's alive, but not great. Dad, I need your help. I'm going to try to get her out tomorrow night, but I'll need somewhere to take her afterward. We can't come back to the ranch right away. It'll be the first place they look." Richard didn't hesitate. "Call Marcus Jenkins. His place is secluded and he owes me a favor. I'll let him know you might be coming." "Thanks, Dad. How's Aurora?" Richard's voice softened. "Holding on. She's eating a little more, but she still spends most of her time at the fence line. She knows, Emma. Somehow she knows you're trying to bring Stella home." Emma's throat tightened. "Tell her I'm trying. Tell her not to give up." After ending the call, Emma contacted Marcus Jenkins, explaining as little as possible while securing his promise of help. She then made one final call to Lisa Delaney, asking for emergency transport assistance, someone with a trailer who could meet her at a moment's notice. Saturday dawned clear and cold. Emma arrived at the compound earlier than usual, her nerves taut as bowstrings. The stolen halter and lead rope were hidden in her jacket, a risk she had to take. Her plan was simple but dangerous. Wait until the evening feeding when the compound was minimally staffed, get Stella out through the blind spot she'd identified, and meet Lisa's contact with a trailer a mile down the road. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emma was assigned to clean water troughs, a task that kept her outside and away from Barn C for most of the morning. By mid-afternoon, her anxiety was reaching fever pitch. She needed to check on Stella to make sure the filly was still in her stall and not already moved to another location. Emma found an excuse to deliver fresh bedding to Barn C, pushing a wheelbarrow of shavings through the wide doors and down the central aisle. Relief washed over her when she saw Stella still in stall 14, but that relief quickly turned to dread when she noticed the filly's condition. Stella stood with her head hanging low, her right front leg held slightly off the ground. A fresh cut marked her shoulder, and her eyes were dull with pain and exhaustion. Near her stall, Emma spotted a training saddle and a riding crop stained with what looked like blood. They had been working with her, trying to force her submission through pain and fear rather than patience and trust. Emma's hands tightened on the wheelbarrow handles until her knuckles turned white. She continued down the aisle, distributing bedding while fighting to control her rage and despair. As she worked, she overheard two stable hands talking. "Tucker's giving up on that bay filly," one said. "Says she's too much trouble for what she's worth." "When's she going out?" asked the other. "Tonight. Some of the culls are being moved to the south holding pens after evening feeding. They'll go out tomorrow instead of Monday." Emma nearly dropped her shovel. Tonight. Not tomorrow, not Monday. Tonight. She finished her tasks in a fog of panic, her carefully constructed plan crumbling around her. There would be no waiting for the cover of darkness, no pre-arranged meeting with a trailer. If Stella was being moved tonight, Emma had only hours, perhaps minutes to act. As she left the barn, she glanced back at Stella one last time. The filly had moved to the front of her stall and was watching Emma with a quiet intensity that broke her heart. It was now or never, Emma realized. She would have one chance to save Stella, and it would have to be soon, regardless of the risk, regardless of the consequences. Emma's mind raced as she walked away from Barn C, forcing herself not to look back, not to run. She needed a plan, not the careful, methodical escape she had been crafting, but something immediate and desperate. The evening feeding would begin in less than an hour. After that, Stella would be moved to the south holding pens, and Emma might never see her again. She made her way to the equipment shed, pretending to search for a replacement rake handle. Inside, away from prying eyes, she pulled out her phone and sent a terse message to Lisa Delaney. "Emergency. Need trailer at North Service Road intersection now. Not tonight. Now." The response came almost immediately. "Calling my contact. 45 minutes minimum." 45 minutes. It would have to be enough. Emma slipped the halter and lead rope from inside her jacket and hid them under a stack of empty feed bags near the shed door. Then she walked briskly to the main office, where Tucker would be finishing paperwork before the evening routines began. She knocked on the open door, her expression carefully neutral. Tucker looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "What is it, Jensen?" "Josh mentioned you needed help with evening feeding in Barn C." Emma lied smoothly. "Said he's short-handed with Miguel out sick." Tucker frowned, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Fine. Start on the north end and work your way down. Josh will handle the south side." "Yes, sir," Emma replied, already turning to leave. "And Jensen," Tucker called after her, "make sure those horses marked for transfer are ready to go by 7. Yellow tags on their stall doors." Emma's heart sank as she walked away. Yellow tags. She hadn't noticed any tags earlier, which meant they must have been placed recently. She quickened her pace, heading first to the equipment shed to retrieve the halter and lead rope, which she tucked back into her jacket. When she entered Barn C, her worst fears were confirmed. Several stalls now bore yellow tags, including Stella's. Josh was already there, preparing feed buckets on the south side of the barn. "Hey," he greeted her. Thanks for helping out. Tucker's got me running in circles today. Emma forced a smile. No problem. I'll start at this end. She began the feeding routine, moving methodically from stall to stall, all while watching for an opportunity. Josh worked efficiently, and Emma knew she would have only a brief window when he might step out to refill water buckets or fetch more grain. Her chance came sooner than expected when Josh's radio crackled to life. Tucker's voice cut through the static, calling him to the main office immediately. Josh looked annoyed but set down his feed scoop. "Can you finish up here?" he asked. "I shouldn't be long." "Sure," Emma replied, keeping her voice casual despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "No problem." The moment Josh disappeared through the barn doors, Emma moved. She hurried to Stella's stall, glancing over her shoulder to ensure she was alone. The filly watched her approach, ears forward, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "We're getting out of here," Emma whispered, unlatching the stall door and slipping inside. She worked quickly, fitting the halter over Stella's head and attaching the lead rope. The filly flinched when Emma's hand brushed against her injured shoulder. "I'm sorry, girl," Emma murmured. "I know it hurts, but we have to go now." She led Stella out of the stall, heart pounding against her ribs. The barn was still empty, but that could change at any moment. Emma guided the filly toward the back door, which opened onto a small paddock area. From there, they would need to cross about 50 yards of open ground to reach the equipment shed, and beyond that, the section of fence with the blind spot she had identified. As they stepped outside, Emma scanned the compound. A security guard was visible near the main gate, but his back was turned. No one else was in sight. She took a deep breath and urged Stella forward, moving as quickly as the filly's injured leg would allow. They had almost reached the equipment shed when a shout rang out behind them. Emma turned to see Josh standing in the doorway of Barn C, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Jensen, what are you doing with that horse?" There was no point in pretense now. Emma broke into a run, pulling Stella alongside her. The filly, sensing the urgency, overcame her pain and matched Emma's pace despite her injury. They darted behind the equipment shed, momentarily out of sight. Emma could hear shouts and the sound of running feet. Any second now, the alarm would be raised and every guard on the property would be after them. She led Stella to the section of fence she had identified, an older portion where the posts were set further apart and the chain link had been stretched and damaged by years of Wyoming winds. Using all her strength, Emma pulled at the loose section of fencing, creating a gap just wide enough for a slender horse to squeeze through. She urged Stella forward, guiding her head through first, then her shoulders. The filly balked briefly when the metal edge scraped against her injury, but Emma's gentle encouragement kept her moving. As Stella made it through, Emma heard the sound of an engine starting nearby, likely a security vehicle. She squeezed through the fence after Stella, her jacket catching and tearing on the metal links. Free of the compound, they faced a stretch of scrubby terrain leading to the service road where, hopefully, Lisa's contact would be waiting with a trailer. "Come on, Stella," Emma urged, breaking into a run again. The filly followed, her initial hesitation giving way to a burst of energy that seemed fueled by the taste of freedom. Behind them, shouts and the growl of engines grew louder. They crested a small rise, and Emma's heart leapt when she saw a truck and trailer parked on the service road ahead. A woman was standing beside it, scanning the landscape with binoculars. When she spotted Emma and Stella, she waved frantically and flung open the trailer door. "Hurry!" she called. "I can see trucks coming." Emma and Stella raced down the slope toward the road. The woman, who introduced herself in a rushed breath as Megan, Lisa's friend, helped guide Stella into the trailer while Emma secured the lead rope. They had just closed the trailer door when headlights appeared on the ridge behind them. "Get in!" Megan shouted, already jumping into the driver's seat. Emma clambered into the passenger side and Megan floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spitting gravel as they sped away from Harrington's compound. In the side mirror, Emma could see two security vehicles cresting the hill, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Megan took a sharp turn onto a smaller road, then another, navigating a confusing series of back routes that Emma hoped would throw off any pursuit. "Lisa said to take you to the old Anderson place," Megan explained, her eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. "It's abandoned, but the barn is solid. You can lay low there until morning." Emma nodded, her body finally registering the enormity of what she had just done. She had committed theft, horse theft no less, and had likely earned herself a place on Harrington's personal blacklist. There would be consequences, perhaps legal ones, but in this moment, all she cared about was the sound of Stella's hooves shifting in the trailer behind them. "Thank you," she said to Megan, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Megan glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Lisa told me what Harrington does to the horses that don't make the cut. I've got 3 rescues of my own at home. This isn't my first rodeo, so to speak." As the truck ate up the miles between them and Harrington's compound, Emma allowed herself a moment of cautious hope. They had made it this far, but they weren't safe yet. Wyoming was Harrington's territory, and they needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and his influence. They still had a long journey ahead before Stella could truly come home. The abandoned Anderson place materialized out of the darkness like a ghost, a weathered farmhouse with boarded windows and a large barn whose silhouette stood stark against the night sky. Megan killed the headlights as they approached, navigating the overgrown driveway by moonlight alone. "Less chance of being spotted this way," she explained, bringing the truck to a stop beside the barn. "The place has been empty for years, but neighbors might notice lights where there shouldn't be any." Emma nodded, understanding the need for caution. They were still too close to Harrington's compound for comfort. She climbed out of the truck, her legs stiff from tension, and moved immediately to the trailer. Inside, Stella stood quietly, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "We made it, girl," Emma whispered, reaching up to stroke the filly's neck. "First step, anyway." Megan had already gone ahead to check the barn. She returned moments later with a flashlight, its beam carefully pointed downward. "It's clear. Some old stalls still intact. Even found some hay that's not completely moldy. It'll do for tonight." Together, they led Stella into the barn. The air inside was musty but not unpleasant, carrying the lingering scent of hay and horses that had once called this place home. Megan's flashlight revealed a row of stalls along one wall, their wooden gates worn but functional. "This one looks sturdiest," Megan said, indicating a stall in the corner. Emma guided Stella inside, removing the halter once the gate was secured. The filly immediately began exploring her new surroundings, her movements cautious but curious. "She seems calmer," Megan observed. "She knows she's away from there," Emma replied, watching Stella with a mixture of relief and concern. "But she's hurt. They were rough with her." Emma examined Stella's injuries more closely in the beam of Megan's flashlight. The cut on her shoulder wasn't as deep as she had feared, but there were other marks. A missing patch of hair on her flank where she had likely been struck, and raw spots on her legs where restraints had been used. "Bastards," Megan muttered, shaking her head. "Lisa keeps a first aid kit in the trailer. I'll grab it." While Megan retrieved the kit, Emma pulled out her phone and called Marcus Jenkins. Despite the late hour, he answered on the second ring. "Emma, is that you?" "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice low. "I've got her, Marcus. We're safe for now, but I need your help. How soon can we come to your place?" "Your father filled me in," Marcus said. "I've got a stall ready, well away from the main barn where no one will think to look. When can you get here?" Emma considered the distance to Marcus's ranch in eastern Montana, at least a day's drive under normal circumstances. longer with an injured horse and the need to avoid main roads. Day after tomorrow, if we're lucky. We'll need to travel at night, stay off the highways. I'll be waiting, Marcus promised. And Emma, be careful. Word travels fast in the horse world. Harrington's likely already put the word out. After ending the call, Emma rejoined Megan, who had spread the first aid supplies on an old feed bin. Together they cleaned and treated Stella's wounds, the filly standing surprisingly still under their gentle ministrations. "She trusts you," Megan remarked, applying ointment to the cut on Stella's shoulder. "Most horses would be a wreck after what she's been through." "We have a history," Emma said softly. "Before Harrington took her, she was born on my ranch. Her mother is still there." Megan paused, looking at Emma with newfound understanding. "This isn't just any rescue, is it?" Emma shook her head. "I had to sell her to save our ranch. Biggest mistake of my life." Once Stella's wounds were treated, Emma and Megan made a makeshift bed of clean straw in the stall adjacent to the fillies. Megan insisted on staying the night, unwilling to leave Emma alone until they were certain they hadn't been followed. "I should get back to Casper by dawn," Megan said as they settled in. "My absence might raise questions otherwise. You'll be okay here for the day?" Emma nodded, grateful for the woman's kindness. "We'll rest, then move on after dark. I can't thank you enough for this." "No thanks needed. What you're doing takes guts." Megan smiled briefly before her expression turned serious. "Just be prepared. Harrington won't let this go easily. That filly represents money to him, and if there's one thing I know about that man, it's that he doesn't like losing money." Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "Harrington reported stolen horse to police. Your description circulating. Stay hidden." She showed the message to Megan, whose lips thinned into a grim line. "Not surprised. You need to get out of Wyoming fast." They fell into an uneasy silence after that, both eventually drifting into fitful sleep. Emma woke several times during the night, each time immediately checking on Stella, reassured by the soft sounds of the filly's breathing in the neighboring stall. Dawn arrived with pale fingers of light seeping through cracks in the barn's wooden walls. Megan departed with a promise to return that evening with food, water, and a new burner phone for Emma. "Ditch the one you have now," she advised. "They might be able to track it." Alone with Stella, Emma allowed herself a moment to fully process what had happened, and what still lay ahead. She had rescued Stella from Harrington's compound, but they were far from safe. The journey to Marcus's ranch would be challenging, especially with Stella's injuries. And even if they made it there, what then? Harrington had connections and resources. He wouldn't simply forget about a valuable horse that had been stolen from him. Emma approached Stella's stall, where the filly was nibbling at the hay Megan had found. When she saw Emma, Stella lifted her head and nickered softly, a sound that brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes. "Your mom misses you," Emma told her, reaching through the stall bars to stroke her neck. "She's been waiting for you to come home." At the gentle touch, Stella moved closer, resting her head against Emma's shoulder through the bars. The simple gesture of trust overwhelmed Emma, and she wrapped her arms around the filly's neck, burying her face in Stella's mane. "I'm so sorry I let this happen to you," she whispered. "But I promise I'm going to make it right. We're going home." Throughout the day, Emma divided her time between caring for Stella and planning their journey. Using a map Megan had left, she charted a route that would take them north through back roads, avoiding towns and checkpoints where word of a stolen horse might have spread. She knew they couldn't transport Stella in Megan's trailer for the entire journey. It would be too conspicuous, and Megan couldn't be away from her job for that long without raising suspicions. They would need to find another way to travel, at least for part of the distance. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Emma heard the distant sound of a vehicle approaching. She tensed, moving to the barn door to peer through a crack. Relief washed over her when she recognized Megan's truck coming up the driveway. The time had come to move on. The real journey, the long road home to Aurora, was about to begin. Megan brought not only supplies, but also troubling news. "Harrington's got people looking all over Casper and the surrounding areas," she reported as she unloaded bottles of water and sandwiches from a canvas bag. "He's offering a reward for information, $5,000. Emma's stomach tightened. "That's a lot of money in these parts." "Enough to turn heads," Megan agreed grimly. "The good news is, they seem to be focusing on the main roads and towns. No one's mentioned this old place yet." While Emma ate a sandwich, Megan outlined her plan. "I can't take you all the way to Montana, too risky, and I'd be missed. But I have a friend who runs a small trail riding operation about 70 miles north of here, just across the state line. He owes me a favor and doesn't ask questions." "Will he help us get to Marcus's ranch?" Megan nodded. "Dave's got connections with ranchers all across Montana. He can arrange for a series of trailer rides, different drivers, different vehicles. It'll take longer, but it's safer than trying to make one straight shot." It was a solid plan, better than anything Emma had come up with on her own. They decided to leave as soon as darkness fell completely, using back roads and ranch tracks that Megan knew from her years working in the area. "What about your truck and trailer?" Emma asked as they prepared Stella for the journey. "Won't they be recognized?" Megan smiled slyly. "Already taken care of. Swapped plates with a friend's rig for the night. If anyone's looking for my truck, they're looking for different numbers." They departed the Anderson place shortly after 9 when the night was deep enough to conceal their movement. Stella loaded into the trailer with minimal resistance, as if she understood the urgency of their situation. Emma sat beside Megan in the truck's cab, constantly scanning the road behind them for signs of pursuit. The journey north was tense but uneventful. Megan navigated a labyrinth of service roads, ranch tracks, and unmarked paths that didn't appear on any map. Occasionally, they would emerge onto a proper road for a short stretch before disappearing back into the network of hidden routes that crisscrossed the Wyoming countryside. "How do you know all these roads?" Emma asked after they turned onto yet another unmarked track that seemed to lead into nothingness. "Used to date a ranch hand who moonlighted as a hunting guide," Megan replied with a wry smile. "He showed me every back way in 3 counties. Never thought it would come in handy like this, though." Around midnight, they crossed the state line into Montana, not at any official border crossing, but at an unremarkable stretch of fence that separated one vast ranch from another. Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders as they left Wyoming behind. They weren't safe yet, not by a long shot, but at least they were out of Harrington's immediate territory. 2 hours later, they arrived at a cluster of log buildings nestled in a wooded valley. A man was waiting for them, his silhouette outlined against the warm light spilling from an open barn door. "That's Dave," Megan said, pulling the truck to a stop. "Remember, let me do the talking at first." Dave turned out to be a weathered, taciturn man in his 50s with kind eyes that belied his gruff exterior. He listened silently as Megan explained the situation in carefully worded terms, never directly mentioning theft or Harrington by name. "So," he said when she finished, turning his gaze to Emma, "you're taking this filly home where she belongs." It wasn't a question, but Emma nodded anyway. "Yes, sir. Her mother's waiting for her." Dave studied her for a moment, then nodded once, decisively. "Let's get her settled for the night. You look dead on your feet, girl." They unloaded Stella into a clean, comfortable stall in Dave's barn, well away from his trail horses. After ensuring the filly had water and hay, Dave led Emma and Megan to a small cabin where they could rest. "I've got a friend taking a load of horses up to Great Falls day after tomorrow," he told them as he prepared to leave. "He can take you part way. I'll make some calls tomorrow, set up the rest of your journey." When he was gone, Emma turned to Megan. "You trust him?" "With my life," Megan replied without hesitation. "Dave's one of the good ones. His daughter was killed in a car accident 10 years ago. She loved horses more than anything. Helping you is his way of honoring her memory, even if he'd never say so." Emma slept better that night than she had since finding Stella at Harrington's compound. The knowledge that they were across the state line in the care of someone Megan trusted implicitly allowed her to relax enough to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next day, Emma spent hours with Stella, cleaning her wounds and talking to her in a low, soothing voice. The filly's condition was improving. Her injured leg bore more weight, and there was a new brightness in her eyes. When Emma brushed her coat, Stella leaned into the strokes, seeking the comfort of physical contact. "Your mom used to love being brushed too," Emma told her. "You're so like her." While Emma cared for Stella, Dave made a series of phone calls, arranging the next legs of their journey. By evening, he had mapped out a route to Marcus's ranch that would involve 3 different drivers and trailers over the course of 4 days. "Each person knows only their part," he explained as they reviewed the plan. "Safer that way. No one can give away the whole route if they're questioned." Emma was touched by the efforts of these strangers to help her and Stella. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Dave. He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Just get that filly home to her mother. That's thanks enough." Megan departed the next morning, needing to return to Casper before her absence raised questions. She hugged Emma tightly before leaving. "Be careful. This isn't over yet." "I know," Emma replied. "Thank you for everything." Later that day, Emma's new burner phone rang, a call from her father. "Emma," Richard's voice was tight with concern. "Harrington was here." Emma's blood ran cold. "At the ranch? What did he want?" "He knows, Emma. He knows you took Stella. He had 2 men with him and they searched the entire property. When they didn't find her, he made threats. Said he has friends in law enforcement across 3 states, that it was only a matter of time before they caught up with you." Emma closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. "Did he do anything? Say anything about Aurora?" There was a pause, then Richard sighed heavily. "He said if Stella isn't returned within a week, he'll file formal theft charges. And he mentioned that Aurora might be considered partial compensation for his loss." "He threatened to take Aurora?" Emma's voice rose sharply, causing Stella to look up in alarm from her hay. "Not in so many words, but the implication was clear. I've asked Marcus to send a couple of his hands over to help keep an eye on things here. But Emma, you need to be careful. This man is dangerous." After ending the call, Emma leaned against Stella's stall door, her mind racing. Harrington was escalating the situation, using Aurora as leverage. The thought of him anywhere near the Mare made Emma physically ill. Dave found her still standing there, her face pale with worry. He didn't ask what was wrong, just handed her a cup of coffee and waited. "He went to my father's ranch," Emma finally said. "He's threatening my other horse, Stella's mother." Dave nodded slowly. "Then we need to move faster. My friend will be here at dawn. You'll leave first thing." As Emma prepared for the next phase of their journey, a new determination hardened within her. She had rescued Stella from Harrington, and she would protect Aurora too, whatever it took. The stakes had just risen dramatically, turning what had been a rescue mission into something that felt increasingly like a war. Dawn arrived with a fine mist hanging over Dave's property, shrouding the trees and buildings in a ghostly haze. Emma had barely slept, her mind churning with worries about Aurora. She stood outside Stella's stall, watching the filly eat her morning hay, when the sound of an approaching vehicle drew her attention. A moment later, Dave appeared at the barn door. "That's Carl," he said. "Time to go." Carl turned out to be a burly, silver-haired man with weathered hands and few words. He drove a modest one-ton truck pulling a stock trailer that had seen better days, the perfect disguise for their journey. Nothing about the rig would attract attention or suggest it was carrying valuable cargo. "He'll take you as far as Helena," Dave explained as they prepared to load Stella. "Another friend will meet you there for the next leg." Emma approached Stella with the halter, speaking softly as she slipped it over the filly's head. Despite the improvements in her condition, Stella still bore the physical and emotional scars of her time at Harrington's compound. She followed Emma willingly enough, but balked slightly at the sight of the unfamiliar trailer. "It's okay, girl," Emma reassured her, stroking her neck. "This is just another step toward home." With gentle persistence, they coaxed Stella into the trailer. Carl secured the divider, ensuring she would have a comfortable ride, then turned to Emma. "We'll stick to back roads," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Take longer, but safer. You good with that?" Emma nodded. "Whatever keeps us under the radar." Before departing, she hugged Dave goodbye, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers who were risking their own safety to help her. "Thank you for everything." "Just passing along a kindness," Dave replied gruffly. "Someone did the same for me once." The journey with Carl was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the truck wound its way through the Montana landscape. Occasionally, he would point out a landmark or tell a brief story about the area, but mostly they traveled in companionable silence. Every few hours, they would stop to check on Stella and offer her water, the filly growing increasingly comfortable with the routine of travel. During one such stop, Emma's phone rang, Richard calling from Willow Creek. "How's Aurora?" Emma asked immediately. "Holding on," Richard replied, his voice weary. "Marcus sent over 2 of his hands. They're taking turns keeping watch, no sign of Harrington or his men since the visit." "And you? How are you holding up?" There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "I should be asking you that question. You're the one on the run with a stolen horse." "Not stolen," Emma corrected automatically. "Rescued." Semantics won't matter much to a judge, Emma. The reminder of the legal jeopardy she faced sent a chill through her. "I know, Dad, but I couldn't leave her there. You should have seen how they were treating her." "I understand," Richard said gently. "I would have done the same. Just be careful." After ending the call, Emma rejoined Carl in the truck, her expression troubled. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "Problems at home?" "Harrington threatened my father and Stella's mother," Emma replied, staring out at the passing landscape. "He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Carl nodded thoughtfully. "Men like that rarely do, but they also underestimate what people will do to protect their own." By late afternoon, they approached Helena. Following Dave's instructions, Carl drove to a small acreage on the outskirts of town, where a woman named Sarah was waiting for them. She stood beside a newer trailer hitched to a dual-wheel pickup, her arms crossed against the chill mountain air. "You must be Emma," she greeted them as they pulled up. "Dave called. Said you needed a ride to Great Falls." The transfer went smoothly, Stella now accustomed enough to the process that she loaded into Sarah's trailer with minimal hesitation. Emma thanked Carl, who simply nodded and drove away without ceremony, his part in their journey complete. Sarah proved to be a knowledgeable traveling companion, a former barrel racer who now bred quarter horses for ranch work. "Dave didn't tell me much," she admitted as they headed north. "Just that you were in trouble and needed help getting a horse home." Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share. "It's complicated. The filly was taken from our ranch under false pretenses. I'm just trying to get her back to her mother." Sarah nodded, accepting the simplified explanation without pressing for details. "Family should be together," she said simply. They reached Great Falls shortly after nightfall and continued to a ranch outside the city limits where they would spend the night. Sarah's friend Diane, the ranch owner, provided a stall for Stella and a spare room for Emma, asking no questions about their unexpected arrival. In the relative privacy of Diane's guest room, Emma called Marcus to update him on their progress. "You're making good time," he said. "My place is about 6 hours from Great Falls in good weather. If you leave early tomorrow, you could be here by mid-afternoon." "Is everything ready?" Emma asked. "All set. I've prepared the back barn like we discussed. No one who doesn't need to know will be aware you're here." The next leg of their journey would be the longest single stretch, taking them from Great Falls to Marcus's ranch near the town of Wolf Point in northeastern Montana. Sarah had arranged for her nephew, a college student named Tyler, to drive them the entire way. "He's young but reliable," Sarah assured Emma as they ate breakfast the next morning, "and he knows every back road between here and the North Dakota border." Tyler arrived driving a crew cab pickup pulling a 3-horse slant-load trailer, larger and more conspicuous than Emma would have preferred but necessary for the longer journey. He greeted them with the nervous energy of someone aware they were involved in something clandestine but excited by the adventure of it. "Aunt Sarah said to get you there safe and not to take the interstate," he said, helping Emma load Stella into the trailer. "I mapped out a route that sticks to county roads most of the way." As they prepared to depart, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Called Marcus. We'll meet you there with A." Emma stared at the message, her heart racing. Richard was bringing Aurora to Marcus's ranch. The reunification of Mare and Foal, a moment Emma had barely dared to hope for, was suddenly within reach. But the joy of that realization was tempered by a follow-up text. "Harrington filed police report. Warrant issued for questioning. Be careful." The legal noose was tightening. Emma had known this might happen, but seeing it confirmed sent a wave of anxiety through her. If she was arrested, what would happen to Stella? Would the filly be returned to Harrington as stolen property? As they pulled away from Diane's ranch, Emma gazed back at Stella, visible through the trailer's side window. The filly's eyes met hers, and in that moment, Emma knew there was no turning back. Whatever consequences awaited her, she would face them. She had made a promise to both Aurora and Stella, and she intended to keep it. Their destination lay ahead, and with it a reunion years in the making. The journey to Marcus's ranch seemed endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Emma sat beside Tyler in the truck, watching the Montana landscape roll past her window, vast plains broken by gentle hills, scattered ranches, and the occasional small town. They stopped twice to rest and check on Stella, the filly now a seasoned traveler who accepted water and hay from Emma's hands with quiet trust. Throughout the drive, Emma's thoughts oscillated between hope and fear. Hope for the reunion of Mare and Foal, fear of the legal consequences that might separate them all again. The warrant for questioning was just the beginning. If formal charges were filed, she could face jail time, fines, a criminal record that would follow her for life. "Worth it, though," she murmured to herself, watching Stella through the trailer window. "Did you say something?" Tyler asked, glancing away from the road. Emma shook her head. "Just thinking out loud." As they approached Wolf Point, Tyler followed the directions Marcus had provided, turning onto increasingly remote roads until they reached a cattle guard marking the boundary of Jenkins Ranch. A weathered wooden sign swung gently in the breeze, the name carved deep into pine that had silvered with age. "Almost there," Tyler said, navigating the truck and trailer carefully along the rutted driveway that wound between stands of cottonwood trees. The ranch house appeared first, a sprawling single-story building with a wide porch and stone chimney. Beyond it lay several barns and outbuildings, corrals, and pastures that stretched toward distant hills. As they pulled up to the main house, Marcus emerged from the front door, followed by a rangy border collie that danced around his legs. "Made good time," he greeted them, approaching the truck as Emma climbed out. He embraced her briefly, his expression a mixture of concern and relief. "Your father called again. They're about 3 hours behind you." Emma's heart leapt at the news. "Have you heard anything else? About Harrington or the police?" Marcus's expression tightened. "Nothing good. The warrant's been circulated to law enforcement in Montana. Harrington's pushing hard for theft charges." Emma had expected as much, but the confirmation still sent a wave of dread through her. "Let's get Stella settled first. We can talk about the rest later." Marcus led them to a small barn set apart from the main ranch buildings, half hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. "Thought it would be best to keep her separate," he explained as they unloaded Stella from the trailer. Fewer questions from the hands. The barn was clean and well-maintained, with 3 roomy stalls and a small tack room. Stella explored her new quarters with cautious interest, her movements more fluid than they had been days earlier. The journey had been long, but her injuries were healing, her spirit resilient. After ensuring Stella was comfortable with fresh water and hay, Emma followed Marcus back to the main house. Tyler departed with a wave and wishes of good luck, another link in the chain of strangers who had risked their own safety to help her. Inside, Marcus poured coffee and laid out the situation plainly. "Harrington's got connections in law enforcement. Not here, but in Wyoming, certainly. The warrant's legitimate, and if they find you, you'll have to go in for questioning at minimum." "And at maximum," Marcus sighed. "Horse theft is still a serious offense in these parts, Emma. If he pursues charges and they stick, you could be looking at jail time." Emma stared into her coffee, letting the reality of her situation sink in. "I'd do it again," she said finally, looking up. "After seeing how they treated her, what they were planning to do to her, I'd do it all again." Before Marcus could respond, the ranch dog began barking outside, signaling the arrival of another vehicle. Emma rushed to the window, her pulse quickening at the sight of her father's familiar truck pulling a horse trailer. "They're here," she breathed, already heading for the door. Richard Williams looked older than when Emma had left home just weeks earlier, the lines in his face deeper, his movements more deliberate as he climbed down from the truck. But his eyes lit up at the sight of his daughter, and he embraced her with surprising strength. "You did it," he said simply. "You found her and brought her back." Emma nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. Her attention was already shifting to the trailer where Aurora waited, unaware that her long-lost foal was just yards away. "Let's get her settled first," Richard suggested, understanding Emma's impatience. Then the reunion. They led Aurora to the small barn where Stella was housed, the mare alert and curious about her new surroundings. She showed no sign of recognizing Stella's scent yet. The barn smells were too new, too confusing. Once Aurora was in the stall adjacent to Stella's, Richard and Marcus tactfully withdrew, leaving Emma alone to orchestrate the reunion she had dreamed of for so long. She stood in the barn aisle, watching as the 2 horses became aware of each other's presence. Aurora noticed first, her head coming up sharply, nostrils flaring as she caught a scent both familiar and long forgotten. She nickered softly, questioningly, moving to the stall divider that separated her from Stella. Stella, who had been dozing in the corner, woke at the sound. Her ears pricked forward, her body suddenly tense with alertness. She approached the divider cautiously, stretching her neck to catch Aurora's scent. For a moment, they stood frozen, 2 pairs of dark eyes locked together across the wooden barrier. Then Aurora let out a sound Emma had never heard before, part nicker, part whinny, a call that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within her being. Stella responded immediately, her own call higher, but unmistakably an answer. With tears streaming down her face, Emma opened the gate between the stalls. Aurora stepped through without hesitation, moving directly to Stella. Their reunion was gentle, no dramatic racing or rearing, just Aurora circling her now-grown foal, touching her with her muzzle, breathing in her scent as if to reassure herself that this was truly her child. Stella stood still at first, then began to respond, her movements mirroring her mother's, their communication in a language Emma could witness but never fully understand. Eventually, they settled side by side, Aurora's head draped protectively over Stella's withers, their breathing synchronized in perfect harmony. Emma slipped out of the barn, leaving mother and daughter to their private reunion. Outside, she found Richard and Marcus waiting, their own eyes suspiciously bright. They recognized each other, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. After all this time, all they've been through, they knew. Richard squeezed her shoulder. Some bonds can't be broken. The next few days passed in a strange limbo of joy and anxiety. Emma spent most of her time with Aurora and Stella, watching as they reestablished their connection, marveling at how they moved together in the small paddock adjacent to the barn. Aurora was noticeably more energetic, her dull coat regaining its shine, her eyes bright with renewed purpose. Stella, too, continued to heal, both physically and emotionally, under her mother's attentive care. But the specter of legal consequences loomed large. Marcus received word that local law enforcement had been asked to be on the lookout for Emma and Stella. It was only a matter of time before they came to the ranch, where Marcus's reputation might buy them a brief reprieve but not immunity. The solution, when it came, was both unexpected and elegant. Lisa Delaney, who had been documenting Harrington's operation for months, provided evidence to state authorities about the conditions at his compound and his practice of shipping reject horses to slaughter, a violation of state regulations he had been circumventing for years. The resulting investigation shifted the focus from Emma's actions to Harrington's operation. When faced with potential charges of his own, Harrington agreed to drop his complaint against Emma in exchange for a lighter investigation into his business practices. "It's not perfect," Marcus admitted when he delivered the news. "The man's still operating, still buying and selling horses, but he's under scrutiny now, and you're in the clear." For Emma, it was enough. As she stood watching Aurora and Stella grazing together in the paddock, their dark coats gleaming in the late afternoon sun, she felt a sense of completion, of promises kept and wrongs righted. "Ready to go home?" Richard asked, joining her at the fence. Emma nodded, her eyes never leaving the two horses. More than ready. 3 days later, under a sky bright with stars, Aurora and Stella returned to Willow Creek Ranch. As the trailer doors opened onto the familiar landscape of their home, they stepped out together, two shadows moving as one into the moonlit pasture where their journey had begun.